Donald Trump's favorite governing style has always been improvisation disguised as dominance, loud declarations, vague threats, and a constant hunt for a headline that will move markets, shift blame, or simply drown out the last disaster. But there are moments when the performance can't hold, when reality pushes back harder than the spin. The picture painted here is one of those moments, a president pacing around his luxury properties while a self-inflicted crisis escalates abroad, then scrambling for a narrative just as the futures markets are about to open, as if the right leak to the right paper can substitute for a plan. That instinct, treating war like a PR problem and the American economy like a prop, should chill every voter regardless of party, because this isn't merely chaos as a personality quirk. It's a governing doctrine, spectacle over strategy, personal brand over public interest, and short-term market optics over long-term national security. Start with the central. Tell the rush to call the Wall Street Journal on the brink of a market open with claims about a soon-to-be-announced coalition to escort shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. In a functional administration, maritime security planning would be boringly procedural diplomats lining up commitments, defense officials coordinating rules of engagement, allies issuing joint statements, and Congress demanding clarity about objectives and authorization. In Trump world, the process runs backward. First comes the leak, then the marketing, then the frantic search for other countries willing to play along. If the story collapses under basic scrutiny, who are the countries? What assets are they providing? When does it start? Under what legal authority? That's fine, because the point isn't durable policy. The point is to create a temporary impression of control that might dampen oil prices and calm investors long enough to avoid another news cycle dominated by Trump's war is spiraling. That's not leadership. It's the political equivalent of trying to stop a house fire by adjusting the thermostat. And the more the administration's story sounds improvised, the more dangerous the underlying reality becomes. The Strait of Hormuz isn't a cable news graphic. It's one of the world's most critical maritime choke points, and any serious national security team understands that. Messing with it invites a cascade, spikes in energy prices, global shipping disruptions, panic in allied capitals, and knock-on effects through everything from fertilizer production to food prices. The transcript describes exactly that chain reaction. This is where Trump's "I alone can fix it" mythology collides with the mechanics of the global economy. Energy markets don't care about his slogans. Shipping insurers don't price risk based on his Truth Social posts. And working families don't get relief because he found a flattering headline. They pay at the pump, at the grocery store, and eventually in the form of broader economic instability. The Trump MAGA movement loves to wrap itself in strength, but what it actually sells is domination theater. When the show goes well, supporters call it genius. When it collapses, they demand everyone pretend it's still genius. That's how you end up with a White House that, according to the transcript, projects confidence, while the president is reportedly raging at his generals behind the scenes about why a complex strategic objective can't be achieved. Instantly. This is a familiar pattern for Trump. He confuses the ability to order people around with the ability to bend reality. He believes that because he can intimidate subordinates, he can intimidate geography, logistics, alliances, and adversaries. But national security is not a boardroom where you can fire the messenger. Military leaders can't conjure a reopened strait by force of will, not without consequences and not without planning. When Trump overrides caution and then acts surprised by predictable retaliation, that's not boldness, that's recklessness with American lives attached to it. Then there's the moral corrosion, the way war becomes content. The transcript references a posture of executive time while serious events unfold, the treatment of conflict like a media product, and even political fundraising around military imagery. The details matter less than the governing ethic they reflect. Trump does not experience public office as stewardship. He experiences it as ownership. Soldiers become branding opportunities. Diplomatic crises become ratings. And human suffering becomes background noise unless it can be weaponized against an enemy or used to flatter himself. This is why Democrats keep hammering the point that competence and decency are national security assets. An America led by someone who cannot separate the gravitas of war from the dopamine rush of attention is an America that invites miscalculation by our adversaries, by our allies, and by ourselves. The transcript's most grotesque moment is the casual flirtation by a Trump-aligned surrogate with the idea of using thermonuclear detonations to solve a maritime bottleneck. Let's be blunt, even floating that kind of suggestion in the public square is a form of strategic sabotage. It signals to the world that the people orbiting this administration treat the unthinkable as a punchline or a policy brainstorm. You don't need to debate the engineering fantasy to understand the damage. Nuclear weapons aren't memes. Any normalization of nuclear talk, especially in a regional conflict with multiple actors and hair-trigger escalation risks, erodes deterrent stability and undermines America's credibility as a responsible power. If the MAGA brand is peace through strength, then why does it so often metastasize into shock the world to prove we can? That isn't strength, it's insecurity with a microphone. Notice, too, the recurring Trump contradiction. Not ruling out ground troops while signaling an operation is not imminent, declaring opponents decimated while simultaneously begging other nations to handle passage through the strait, insisting the situation is under control, while oil prices and regional strikes suggest otherwise. This is not random incoherence. It's a tactic: keep every option rhetorically on the table so you can claim toughness while keeping every commitment substantively off the table so you can dodge accountability. It's how Trump tries to occupy all political positions at once: hawkish enough to excite the base, evasive enough to avoid responsibility, and vague enough to rewrite the story later. But that kind of ambiguity is exactly what makes crises worse. Adversaries interpret mixed signals as either bluffing or preparation for escalation. Allies interpret them as unreliability. Markets interpret them as instability. And the American public gets whiplash, told to feel safe, then asked to absorb the costs, then scolded when they demand answers. The broader geopolitical spillover described here is a reminder that the world doesn't pause while Trump chases a headline. When the United States is consumed by an avoidable conflict, other flashpoints don't disappear, they intensify. The transcript points to heightened tensions in multiple regions, including concerns about Asia's security environment and the strategic implications of shifting U.S. military resources. Whether or not every specific claim is perfectly framed, the principle is undeniable. Major U.S. military commitments have opportunity costs, and adversaries watch for distraction. A president who stumbles into a war without planning creates exactly the kind of global volatility that makes multiple crises more likely. And that's why Democrats have long argued that diplomacy is not weakness, it's a force multiplier. When you prevent a war, you don't just save lives and money, you preserve strategic bandwidth for the threats that truly demand it. This is also where the domestic consequences become politically fatal for Trump, because they cut through the culture war fog. You can change the subject on cable news. You can gin up outrage about wokeness. You can scream about enemies and traitors. But you cannot talk families out of their bills. If oil spikes, transportation costs rise. If fertilizer inputs surge, food prices follow. If supply chains reroute, costs compound. Inflation is not a conspiracy, it's arithmetic. And when the transcript cites warnings that even an immediate ceasefire wouldn't instantly reverse the shock, it underscores the real-world lag that MAGA propaganda can't erase. Trump's movement has tried to market itself as pro-worker while delivering governance that routinely exposes workers to unnecessary volatility, because volatility is profitable for grifters and punishing for everyone else. The Democratic critiques quoted in the transcript land for a reason. They point back to an alternative model that actually existed and actually worked. The idea that Iran's nuclear program was previously contained without a shot being fired isn't some abstract partisan claim. It reflects a basic democratic worldview verification diplomacy pressure through coordinated alliances and restraint backed by credibility. Trump's approach, by contrast, tends to be maximalist rhetoric, paired with transactional isolation, alienating partners, undermining multilateral frameworks, and then acting shocked when the United States stands alone at the moment. Collective action is required. If you spend years insulting allies, threatening them, and treating NATO or other coalitions like protection rackets, don't be surprised when they hesitate to jump at your command. Alliances are built on trust. Trump spends trust like it's monopoly money, then demands the world accept IOUs. And perhaps the most damning political truth embedded here is how the MAGA project collapses under its own promises. Trump sells himself as the guy who won't get dragged into foreign wars, then careens into precisely the kind of entanglement he once claimed to despise. He sells America first, then delivers policies that light the fuse under global energy markets and boomerang costs back onto American households. He sells law and order, then revels in executive improvisation, institutional degradation, and governance by tantrum. His defenders will always try to reframe this as tough decisions, but toughness isn't measured by how loudly you posture. It's measured by whether you prevent avoidable disasters and manage unavoidable ones with discipline. The transcript's portrait is the opposite, a president improvising conflict, trying to narrate his way out of consequences, and leaving Americans to absorb the shock. Here's the takeaway. Democrats should never stop saying plainly, competence is patriotic, process is patriotic. Alliances are patriotic, the rule of law is patriotic. Trumpism treats all of those as obstacles because a competent system limits the power of one man to play president like a reality show. That's why you see the same pattern again and again. Undermine experts, demean institutions, elevate loyalists, attack the press, and then try to muscle reality into compliance. In domestic politics, that yields corruption and cruelty. In foreign policy, it yields instability and bloodshed. And when the inevitable blowback hits, when oil prices surge, when regional tensions flare, when markets panic, Trump's first instinct isn't to take responsibility or stabilize the situation with transparent leadership. It's to manipulate the story and hope the public forgets who lit the match.